Grizzly attacks unfold like nature's warning shot, sudden, fierce, and rooted in instinct rather than intent. These immense creatures, cloaked in silence and strength, strike not out of cruelty, but out of survival. One wrong move, a startled cub, or a breached boundary can spark a powerful reaction. Each encounter is a raw exchange between two worlds, human and wild, colliding in a moment of misunderstanding. To grasp the reality of these attacks is to recognize the wild's unwritten rules, where respect isn't requested, it's required for both peace and protection. The Shantar Islands, located in the Sea of Okhotsk off Russia's eastern coast, had long been known for their pristine wilderness and abundant wildlife. For centuries, these remote islands remained largely undisturbed, with their rugged coastlines and dense taiga forests providing sanctuary for diverse species, including the formidable Russian grizzly bear. In recent years, however, the discovery of valuable mineral deposits had drawn human activity to this once isolated archipelago. The Vostok Mining Company established operations on the largest island in 2023, constructing a network of tunnels that extended deep into the rocky terrain. The company employed mostly local workers from mainland Russia, many of whom were accustomed to the harsh conditions of the Far East, but less familiar with navigating wildlife encounters in such remote settings. On April 20th, 2025, as spring was slowly awakening the landscape after a long winter, the night shift at the Vostok mine began like any other. The workers arrived at dusk, ready for their 12-hour stint extracting copper and gold from the earth. Among them were Vladimir Ivanov, a 34-year-old experienced miner from Khabarovsk, and Mikhail Kozlov, 42, who had joined the operation only 3 months prior after relocating from Vladivostok. The evening air carried the scent of the workers' dinner, a hearty stew prepared in the camp kitchen and brought to the mine site. Unknown to the crew, this aromatic trail had attracted the attention of a large male Russian grizzly bear that had recently emerged from hibernation. Bears were typically wary of human presence, but this particular animal, estimated to weigh over 800 pounds, was likely desperate for food after the winter's fast. As darkness fell across the island, most of the workers descended into the main shaft, leaving Vladimir and Mikhail to organize supplies in the storage area near the mine's lower entrance. The two men worked methodically, cataloging equipment and preparing materials for the next day's operations. Neither noticed the massive shape moving silently through the shadows outside. The bear, drawn by hunger and the lingering scent of food, approached the storage area around 10:30 p.m. It hesitated briefly at the entrance, its powerful sense of smell confirming the presence of potential food. In one swift motion, the animal lumbered through the doorway, surprising Vladimir and Mikhail, who were engrossed in their inventory tasks. Vladimir spotted the bear first and attempted to warn his colleague. But before either man could react, the enormous creature charged. In the confined space of the storage room, there was nowhere to flee. The bear seized Vladimir first, its powerful jaws clamping down on his shoulder with devastating force. When Mikhail tried to intervene, the bear swung its massive paw, catching him across the chest and sending him crashing into a stack of equipment. The commotion echoed through the mine tunnels, alerting other workers to the danger. Sergei Baranov, the night shift supervisor, immediately assembled a response team, but the narrow passages slowed their progress toward the storage area. By the time they arrived, the bear had already inflicted serious injuries on both men. Vladimir suffered deep lacerations to his shoulder and neck, while Mikhail sustained multiple broken ribs and severe cuts across his torso. The storage room, once orderly, now lay in disarray, with supplies scattered and smeared with blood. As the rescue team approached, Anton Kuznetsov, a security guard with hunting experience, fired a warning shot from his sidearm. The sudden noise startled the bear, causing it to retreat from the storage area and disappear into the darkness outside. Emergency protocols were immediately activated. The remaining workers barricaded themselves in the main shaft while medical aid was administered to the injured men. Radio calls to the mainland summoned emergency services, though the remote location meant help would not arrive quickly. Within an hour, the local wildlife authority was notified, and rangers were dispatched to track the bear. After a tense night of waiting, during which Vladimir and Mikhail were stabilized by the camp's medical officer, Yulia Volkova, a helicopter arrived at dawn to evacuate the injured men to a hospital in Khabarovsk. Wildlife rangers located the bear later that morning, approximately 2 kilometers from the mine site. Given the animal's aggressive behavior and the serious nature of the attack, authorities made the difficult decision to euthanize it. Examination of the bear revealed it was indeed malnourished, confirming the theory that hunger had driven it to approach human habitation. The incident sent shockwaves through the mining community and prompted Vostok Mining Company to implement enhanced safety measures. These included the installation of electrified fencing around the perimeter, motion-activated lights and alarms, and mandatory wildlife awareness training for all employees. Both Vladimir and Mikhail survived their ordeal, although their recovery would be a long and arduous process. Vladimir required multiple surgeries to repair the damage to his shoulder, while Mikhail spent 3 weeks in intensive care before being cleared to return to his family. In the months following the attack, environmental groups cited the incident as evidence of the growing conflicts between industrial activities and wildlife in remote regions. The Shantar Islands, they argued, represented a critical habitat for numerous species, and human encroachment was disrupting natural behaviors and creating dangerous situations for both animals and people. The mining company responded by funding a comprehensive wildlife study of the region and establishing a conservation fund dedicated to preserving the island's biodiversity. Meanwhile, the story of the April 20th attack became a cautionary tale told to all new employees arriving at the Shantar operation, a stark reminder of the wild nature that surrounded their industrial outpost and the respect it commanded. As for the Russian grizzly bears of the Shantar Islands, they continued to roam their ancestral territories, powerful symbols of a wilderness that, despite human intervention, remained fundamentally untamed. Kodiak Island, the second-largest island in the United States, situated in the Gulf of Alaska, had long been known for its breathtaking landscapes and formidable wildlife. The island's namesake, the Kodiak bear, represented the largest subspecies of brown bear on Earth, sometimes reaching heights of over 10 feet when standing on hind legs. For centuries, these magnificent creatures had roamed the island's verdant valleys and dense forests, coexisting in a delicate balance with the human population. In 2018, the island's waters were experiencing an exceptional salmon run, drawing bears to the shorelines and streams in greater numbers than usual. This natural phenomenon also attracted fishermen eager to take advantage of the abundant catch, setting the stage for an unexpected confrontation between man and beast. Carl Jenkins, a 39-year-old commercial fisherman from Anchorage, had been visiting Kodiak Island every summer for over 15 years. An experienced outdoorsman, Carl understood the risks associated with fishing in bear territory and typically took appropriate precautions. On July 12, 2018, however, a momentary lapse in vigilance would result in a life-changing encounter. The morning had begun promisingly for Carl as he set up his gear along a secluded stretch of shoreline on the island's eastern coast. The area was known for its excellent fishing opportunities and frequent sightings of bears. Carl had deliberately chosen a spot with good visibility, allowing him to monitor his surroundings while focusing on his catch. By midday, his efforts had been rewarded with several large salmon that he had cleaned and stored in his cooler. Unknown to Carl, the scent of fresh fish had carried downwind to a mature male Kodiak bear foraging in the nearby brush. The animal, estimated to weigh approximately 1,200 pounds, had been tracking the smell for some time before finally emerging from the tree line shortly after 2 p.m. Carl was focused on casting his line when movement in his peripheral vision caught his attention. Turning to his right, he was confronted by the massive bear advancing toward him at an alarming pace. Before he could reach for his bear spray, the animal charged, covering the distance between them in seconds. The initial impact knocked Carl backward into the shallow water of the shoreline. He felt the bear's enormous weight press against him as powerful jaws clamped down on his left forearm. The pressure was immense, and Carl later reported hearing the distinct crack of bones breaking beneath the bear's crushing bite. In a desperate bid for survival, Carl managed to grasp his fishing rod with his free hand and swing it at the bear's face. The unexpected movement caused the animal to release its grip momentarily, giving Carl precious seconds to scramble away from the edge of the water. The bear, however, was not deterred. It pursued Carl as he attempted to retreat, swiping at his legs with massive paws tipped with 4-inch claws. One powerful blow connected with Carl's right thigh, tearing through his waders and deep into the muscle beneath. The pain was excruciating, but adrenaline kept Carl moving as he sought refuge on a nearby rocky outcropping. Using his fishing rod as a makeshift defensive tool, Carl managed to keep the bear at bay by thrusting it toward the animal whenever it approached too closely. This standoff continued for nearly 20 minutes, with the bear making occasional lunges that Carl narrowly avoided. Eventually, the animal's interest seemed to wane, and it retreated temporarily to the tree line, though it remained within sight. Severely injured and losing blood, Carl maintained his precarious position on the rocks, knowing that movement might rekindle the bear's predatory instincts. His satellite phone had been lost during the initial attack, leaving him with no means to call for help. As the hours passed, Carl's condition deteriorated due to blood loss and the onset of shock. Salvation came in the form of Dmitry Petrov and Marcus Williams, fellow fishermen who had planned to meet Carl later that day. When they arrived at the predetermined location around 6:30 p.m., they immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. Marcus stayed with Carl, applying first aid to his wounds, while Dmitry raced back to their boat to radio for emergency assistance. A rescue helicopter from the Coast Guard air station, Kodiak, responded to the distress call, arriving on the scene just before sunset. By this time, the bear had moved further inland, allowing paramedics to reach Carl safely. They stabilized him before airlifting him to a medical center on Kodiak Island. Carl's injuries were extensive: compound fractures in his left arm, deep lacerations to his right thigh that had damaged muscle tissue, and multiple contusions across his body. He required several surgeries and months of physical therapy to regain function in his injured limbs. Despite the severity of the attack, Carl was fortunate to have survived an encounter that could easily have proven fatal. The incident prompted local wildlife authorities to issue renewed warnings about bear safety during the salmon season. They emphasized the importance of carrying bear deterrents, making noise while moving through bear habitat, and storing fish and other attractants properly. Carl Jenkins eventually returned to commercial fishing, but never again visited Kodiak Island alone. His experience served as a powerful reminder of the raw power of these magnificent animals and the respect they command in their natural environment. In subsequent interviews, Carl expressed no animosity toward the bear, acknowledging that he had been in its territory and that the attack was simply the result of their paths crossing at an unfortunate moment. Wildlife biologists studying the incident concluded that the bear's behavior was consistent with a food-motivated approach rather than a predatory attack. The animal had likely been drawn by the scent of freshly cleaned fish and perceived Carl as competition for a valuable food source during a critical feeding period before winter hibernation. For the residents of Kodiak Island and visitors to Alaska's wild places, Carl's story became yet another chapter in the complex relationship between humans and the apex predators they share these remarkable landscapes with. Juneau, Alaska's capital city, nestled between towering mountains and the Gastineau Channel, had always maintained a unique relationship with the wilderness that surrounded it. Unlike many urban centers, Juneau's boundaries blurred seamlessly into pristine forests and alpine meadows, creating an environment where wildlife encounters were not uncommon. The city's residents had grown accustomed to sharing their space with deer, eagles, and occasionally bears, which sought food in populated areas. In 2016, an unusually warm spring had disrupted normal hibernation patterns, causing many bears to emerge earlier than expected, hungry and disoriented. Combined with ongoing development that encroached upon traditional bear habitat, these conditions created a perfect storm for human-wildlife conflict. Northern Lights Grocery, located at the edge of the Mendenhall Valley neighborhood, had stood as a community fixture for over 2 decades. Its expansive parking lot bordered a wooded area that provided a natural corridor for wildlife moving between the mountains and the coast. On May 3, 2016, this ordinary shopping venue would become the setting for an extraordinary encounter. Clara Jennings, a 28-year-old produce manager at Northern Lights Grocery, had just completed her 8-hour shift and was looking forward to returning home. The evening air was crisp as she exited the store at approximately 7:45 p.m., carrying a small bag of groceries she had purchased before clocking out. The parking lot was moderately busy, with shoppers loading their vehicles or returning carts. Unknown to Clara and the other shoppers, a young male grizzly bear had been moving through the wooded area adjacent to the store's property. Wildlife officials later estimated that the bear was approximately 3 years old and had recently become independent from its mother. Its inexperience with human environments, combined with hunger after months of hibernation, had led it to follow the scent of discarded food from the store's dumpsters. Clara had parked her vehicle in the far corner of the lot, close to the tree line. As she approached her car, fumbling for keys in her purse, she remained unaware of the danger lurking nearby. The Grizzly, having emerged from the trees moments earlier, was now moving between parked vehicles, confused and agitated by the unfamiliar surroundings and the scent of humans. Several shoppers noticed the bear first and began shouting warnings. Clara, initially confused by the commotion, looked up just as the Grizzly rounded the back of a pickup truck parked 2 spaces from her vehicle. Their eyes met briefly, a moment of mutual surprise before instinct took over. The bear charged, covering the distance between them in seconds. Clara attempted to retreat but stumbled backward over a parking barrier. Before she could regain her footing, the Grizzly was upon her. Its massive paw struck her thigh with tremendous force, knocking her to the asphalt. The bear then bit down on her left calf, its powerful jaws easily penetrating flesh and muscle. Clara's screams echoed across the parking lot, galvanizing bystanders into action. Bartholomew Nakamura, an off-duty forest ranger who had been shopping inside, rushed toward the scene. Other shoppers began honking car horns and shouting in an attempt to distract the animal. Martin Thornfield, the store manager who had been collecting shopping carts, sprinted to his vehicle and repeatedly triggered his car alarm. The sudden cacophony of noise startled the Grizzly, causing it to release Clara's leg and rear up on its hind legs. This posture made its already impressive size even more intimidating. For several tense seconds, the bear surveyed the growing crowd of people, seemingly assessing whether to continue its attack or retreat. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the Grizzly dropped to all fours and bounded back toward the wooded area, disappearing among the trees. Emergency services arrived within minutes of being called. Paramedics found Clara conscious but in shock, with significant injuries to her left leg. The bear's bite had severed several blood vessels and damaged muscle tissue, requiring immediate medical attention. She was transported to a regional hospital where surgeons worked for over 4 hours to repair the damage. Wildlife authorities responded swiftly to the incident, deploying teams with tracking dogs to locate the bear. After a 2-day search, they successfully tranquilized the animal approximately 3 miles from the grocery store. Given the bear's demonstrated lack of fear toward humans and the severity of the attack, officials made the difficult decision to euthanize it rather than relocate it. The incident sparked intense community debate about urban development and wildlife management in Juneau. Environmental advocates pointed to the city's expansion into traditional bear habitat as the root cause of such conflicts. City officials responded by implementing enhanced waste management protocols for businesses and launching a public education campaign about bear safety. Northern Lights Grocery installed additional lighting in their parking area and arranged for regular brush clearing around the perimeter of their property. They also implemented a policy prohibiting employees from disposing of food waste in outdoor receptacles after dark. Clara Jennings spent 2 weeks in the hospital and faced months of physical therapy to regain full use of her injured leg. Despite her traumatic experience, she expressed sympathy for the bear, acknowledging that it was simply following instincts in an increasingly unnatural world. She later became an advocate for responsible development practices and improved wildlife corridors throughout the city. The parking lot attack served as a sobering reminder to Juneau's residents that coexistence with wild animals required vigilance, respect, and thoughtful planning. In subsequent years, the city invested in wildlife-resistant infrastructure and expanded its bear awareness programs, striving to balance urban needs with the preservation of the wild Alaska that defined their home. As Clara eventually returned to work at Northern Lights Grocery several months later, she adopted a new parking spot, this time as far from the tree line as possible. Khabarovsk, situated along the Amur River in Russia's far east, had long served as a crucial junction between European Russia and the Pacific coast. The city had evolved into a vibrant cultural center while maintaining close ties to the surrounding wilderness. The region's dense forests and rugged mountains provided habitat for numerous wildlife species, including the formidable Ussuri brown bear, a subspecies of grizzly native to the Russian Far East. For generations, the residents of Khabarovsk had celebrated Easter with traditional Orthodox services, followed by festive community gatherings. The local farmers' market, held in Lenin Square, represented a cherished tradition where residents showcased homemade crafts, fresh produce, and regional delicacies. These celebrations typically coincided with the end of winter hibernation for the region's bear population, though encounters within city limits remained exceptionally rare. On April 20th, 2025, the Easter Farmers Market was in full swing by mid-morning. Colorful stalls lined the square, offering everything from hand-painted wooden eggs to freshly baked kulich, the traditional Easter bread. The atmosphere was jovial as families strolled between vendors, sampling foods and greeting neighbors after the long winter months. Natalia Romanova, a 52-year-old artisan baker renowned for her traditional Russian pastries, had secured a prime location near the eastern edge of the square. Her display of intricately decorated pryaniki and paska had drawn considerable attention throughout the morning, creating a constant crowd around her stall. By early afternoon, Natalia was beginning to restock her rapidly depleting inventory when the first screams erupted from the market's perimeter. A male Ussuri brown bear, later estimated to weigh approximately 700 pounds, had somehow wandered into the city outskirts undetected. Wildlife officials would later theorize that the animal had followed the Amur River into town, possibly disoriented after emerging from hibernation. The sense of the market, particularly the abundance of food, had proven irresistible to the hungry animal. The bear's arrival at the crowded venue occurred around 2:15 p.m., when it suddenly emerged from an alleyway connecting Lenin Square to a quieter residential street. Initial reactions were of disbelief rather than panic, as many attendees momentarily mistook the animal for an elaborate Easter costume or performance. This momentary confusion gave the bear time to advance further into the market before the reality of the situation became apparent. When recognition dawned, chaos ensued. Market-goers scattered in all directions, overturning tables and displays in their haste to escape. The sudden movement and noise appeared to agitate the bear further, causing it to rear up on its hind legs before crashing down on a nearby honey vendor's stall. The structure collapsed under the animal's weight, sending jars of honey shattering across the pavement. Natalia Romanova, focused on gathering her goods, didn't immediately notice the commotion. By the time she became aware of the danger, the bear had already changed direction and was moving rapidly toward her stall, likely drawn by the sweet scents of her baked goods. As she attempted to retreat, the bear lunged forward, its massive paw catching her across the back. The force of the blow sent Natalia sprawling forward into her display table. The bear's claws tore through her woolen coat and into the flesh beneath, leaving 4 deep lacerations across her upper back. When the animal moved to attack again, Pyotr Vasilyev, a nearby vendor selling carved wooden items, created a diversion by hurling a folding chair toward the bear. This action, combined with the continuing chaos throughout the square, momentarily distracted the animal. Sergei Orlov, an off-duty police officer attending the market with his family, helped drag the injured Natalia behind a concrete planter while shouting for others to clear the area. By remarkable fortune, Mikhail Volkov, a wildlife ranger with the Regional Forestry Department, had been enjoying the market festivities when the attack occurred. Recognizing the grave danger posed by the confused and increasingly agitated bear, Mikhail radioed for emergency assistance while attempting to coordinate an impromptu response. He instructed bystanders to maintain a distance while creating a clear path for evacuation away from the animal. Within 15 minutes of the initial incursion, local police had established a perimeter around Lenin Square, and a specialized wildlife response team was en route with tranquilizer equipment. The bear, meanwhile, had begun to show signs of confusion amid the unfamiliar urban environment. It paced anxiously between abandoned stalls, occasionally pawing at food items but demonstrating increasingly erratic behavior. When the wildlife response team arrived, led by Senior Ranger Dmitry Kuznetsov, they quickly assessed the situation and deployed a coordinated approach. Using strategic positioning and specialized equipment, they successfully darted the bear with a tranquilizer at approximately 2:45 p.m. The animal collapsed near the center of the square roughly 7 minutes later, ending the terrifying ordeal without further injuries. Natalia Romanova was transported to the regional hospital, where doctors treated her lacerations. Though the wounds were deep, they had narrowly missed her spine and major blood vessels. After receiving over 60 stitches and preventative antibiotics, she was expected to make a full recovery, though the psychological trauma would linger far longer than her physical injuries. The sedated bear was loaded onto a forestry department truck and transported to a wildlife rehabilitation facility outside the city. After a thorough examination, veterinarians determined the animal was underweight, but otherwise healthy. Following a 2-week observation period, it was successfully relocated to a remote area of the Sikote Alin mountain range, far from human settlements. The Easter market incident prompted Khabarovsk city officials to implement enhanced wildlife monitoring systems along the river corridors leading into populated areas. They also established new protocols for seasonal events, including increased security personnel trained in wildlife response and improved emergency communication systems. For the residents of Khabarovsk, the 2025 Easter celebration became a powerful reminder of their city's position at the edge of wilderness. While the community's traditions continued in subsequent years, they carried a newfound awareness of the wild creatures with whom they shared their remarkable corner of Russia's Far East. The National Forest in the Rocky Mountains of northwest Montana, spanning over 2.4 million acres of pristine wilderness in the northern Rockies, had long been a paradise for outdoor enthusiasts. Its ancient cedar groves, crystalline lakes, and rugged mountain terrain offered visitors a glimpse into America's wild heritage. The forest was also home to diverse wildlife, including a healthy population of black bears that generally avoided human contact, but occasionally ventured near campsites in search of food. In August 2022, the Mitchell family from Bozeman chose this spectacular setting for their annual summer camping trip. Thomas Mitchell, a 45-year-old high school science teacher, his wife Rebecca, 43, and their teenage children, Ethan, 17, and Sophia, 15, were experienced campers who had explored many of Montana's wilderness areas over the years. They had selected a remote campsite near Holland Lake, hoping to enjoy the solitude and natural beauty away from more crowded recreational areas. The family arrived at their destination on August 12th and spent the day setting up their campsite, carefully following proper protocols for backcountry camping in bear country. Thomas insisted they hang their food supplies from a tree branch at a distance from their sleeping area, store toiletries in airtight containers, and review bear safety procedures with his family. Despite these precautions, the Mitchells could not have anticipated the sequence of events that would unfold on their second night in the forest. The day had been idyllic, spent hiking to a nearby waterfall and fishing along the lake shore. As twilight descended over the mountains, the family prepared dinner at their campsite, grilled trout they had caught earlier, accompanied by foil-wrapped potatoes, cooked in the embers of their fire. They were careful to clean their cooking area thoroughly afterward, disposing of fish remains far from their tent and washing their cooking equipment in biodegradable soap. By 10:30 p.m., the family had retired to their large 4-person tent, settling into their sleeping bags as the sounds of the forest enveloped them at night. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light through the tree canopy and eliminating the need for flashlights inside the tent. Thomas extinguished their lantern, and conversation gradually faded as fatigue from the day's activities took hold. Approximately 2 hours later, Sophia was awakened by a distinctive snuffling sound outside the tent. Initially dismissing it as the wind or a small nocturnal creature, she remained still until the noise grew louder and was accompanied by heavy footfalls circling their campsite. Now fully alert, she whispered to wake her father. Thomas listened intently before carefully reaching for his flashlight. When he illuminated the interior of the tent, he saw that Rebecca and Ethan were also awake, their expressions reflecting growing concern. Thomas whispered instructions for everyone to remain silent and still, hoping whatever animal was investigating their campsite would lose interest and move on. The strategy seemed effective until a fishhook left inadvertently near the fire pit caught the animal's attention. The sound of metal scraping against stone as the creature investigated the item prompted Thomas to unzip the tent window enough to peer outside cautiously. In the moonlight, he identified a medium-sized black bear approximately 15 yards from their tent, pawing at the remnants of their campfire. Thomas decided to attempt to scare the bear away using techniques he had learned from wildlife safety courses. He instructed his family to make themselves appear larger by standing together while he prepared to create loud noises. On his count, the family emerged from the tent, with Thomas clapping his hands and speaking in a firm, authoritative voice, while the others clustered behind him. Initially, the bear retreated several steps, appearing startled by the sudden human activity. However, instead of fleeing into the forest as expected, the animal paused, then lowered its head in what experienced outdoors people would recognize as a confrontational posture. Before Thomas could instruct his family to back slowly toward a nearby clearing, the bear charged. The attack happened with stunning speed. The bear bypassed Thomas and lunged toward Ethan, who had moved slightly apart from the group. Its powerful forelegs struck the teenager across the back, sending him stumbling forward. As Ethan fell, the bear's teeth grazed his shoulder, tearing through his sleeping shirt and breaking the skin beneath. Thomas reacted instantly, pulling Ethan toward the tent while shouting commands for Rebecca and Sophia to get inside. The bear pursued, swiping at the tent material as the family scrambled within. Reaching for his backpack, Thomas retrieved a canister of bear spray that he had fortunately kept easily accessible. When the bear tore at the tent entrance, Thomas sprayed it directly in the face. The capsaicin-based deterrent had an immediate effect. The bear recoiled, shaking its head vigorously and emitting distressed vocalizations before retreating several yards from the damaged tent. It paced the perimeter of the campsite for approximately 20 minutes, occasionally approaching before backing away again, apparently conflicted between aggression and the lingering effects of the spray. Inside the compromised shelter, Thomas assessed Ethan's injuries by flashlight. The teenager had sustained 4 parallel lacerations across his upper back, none dangerously deep, but all requiring medical attention. Using their first aid kit, Rebecca cleaned the wounds as best she could and applied pressure bandages to control bleeding. The family remained vigilant throughout the night, taking turns watching through the torn section of the tent. By dawn, the bear had departed, though they remained cautious as they quickly packed essential items. Thomas decided they should hike out immediately rather than wait for their planned departure 2 days later. The 4-mile trek back to their vehicle was tense, with Ethan walking between his parents while Sophia carried the bear spray at the ready. They encountered no further wildlife incidents and reached the trailhead by mid-morning. From there, they drove directly to a hospital in Whitefish, where Ethan received 27 stitches across his back and a course of preventative antibiotics. Forest Service officials were notified of the incident, and wildlife management specialists were dispatched to the area to assess the situation. They located the campsite and found evidence of the bear's presence, but determined it had moved on from the immediate vicinity. Warning signs were posted at trailheads, alerting other hikers to the recent encounter. The Mitchell family's experience became a cautionary tale shared in wilderness safety courses throughout Montana. While Ethan's physical recovery was complete within weeks, the psychological impact of the encounter lingered much longer. Thomas later acknowledged that despite their preparations, they had underestimated the importance of having bear deterrents immediately accessible during nighttime hours. The following summer, the Mitchells returned to camping, this time in designated campgrounds with bear-proof food lockers. Their appreciation for Montana's wild places remained undiminished, though now tempered with a deeper respect for the unpredictable nature of wildlife encounters and the importance of maintaining appropriate boundaries between human recreation and animal habitat. The Carpathian Wildlife Center, nestled in the foothills of Romania's most iconic mountain range, had established itself as a premier conservation facility dedicated to the protection and study of European wildlife. The center specialized in rehabilitating injured animals and educating the public about the region's rich biodiversity. Among its most popular residents was Tiberio, a 12-year-old male brown bear who had been rescued as a cub after poachers killed his mother. For over a decade, Tiberio had lived in a spacious enclosure designed to mimic his natural habitat, complete with pools, climbing structures, and forested areas. By 2021, the center had grown into a significant tourist attraction while maintaining its scientific and conservation mission. Its staff included wildlife biologists, veterinarians, and dedicated animal caretakers. Among them, Lucia Ionescu, a 35-year-old zookeeper with 8 years of experience at the facility. Lucia had worked extensively with the center's bear population and had developed a particular rapport with Tiberio, often coordinating his feeding sessions and environmental enrichment activities. April 7, 2021, began as a typical early spring day at the Wildlife Center. Morning temperatures hovered just above freezing, with a damp mist clinging to the surrounding pine forests. The facility was closed to visitors on Wednesdays, allowing staff to conduct thorough enclosure maintenance and special veterinary procedures. Lucia arrived for her shift at 7:30 a.m., reviewing the day's schedule before beginning her rounds. By mid-afternoon, most of Lucia's colleagues were occupied with a medical procedure involving one of the center's recently rescued wolf cubs, leaving her to manage the bear feeding on her own. This was not an unusual circumstance, as Lucia had handled solo feedings many times before. The established protocol required that bears be secured in their indoor holding areas before keepers entered the main enclosure to distribute food. At approximately 3:15 p.m., Lucia prepared Tiberiu's afternoon meal, consisting of fresh fish, root vegetables, and assorted fruits, a diet designed to approximate the omnivorous feeding patterns of wild brown bears. She activated the electronic system that would typically secure the sliding door between Tiberiu's outdoor enclosure and his indoor holding area, then waited for confirmation that the bear had moved inside. Security camera footage later revealed that Lucia, perhaps distracted by radio communication regarding the wolf cub procedure, failed to verify that Tiberiu had entered the holding area. The electronic door indicator showed green, suggesting proper closure, but a subsequent investigation would determine that a mechanical malfunction had prevented the door from fully engaging its lock mechanism. Additionally, in her haste, Lucia neglected to properly secure the keeper access gate behind her when she entered the enclosure. Carrying the food container, Lucia proceeded into Tiberiu's outdoor habitat, following the designated keeper pathway toward the feeding platform. She had covered about 20 meters when movement in her peripheral vision made her turn. To her horror, she discovered Tiberiu emerging from behind a rock formation, having never entered the holding area as expected. Training dictated that keepers facing unexpected bear encounters should remain calm, avoid direct eye contact, and back slowly toward the nearest exit. Lucia initially followed this protocol, placing the food container on the ground and beginning to retreat toward the access gate. However, Tiberiu, perhaps confused by the break in routine or sensing Lucia's mounting fear, began to advance toward her more rapidly. When the bear closed to within 10 meters, Lucia's composure faltered. She turned and ran toward the exit, inadvertently triggering Tiberiu's predatory instinct to chase after her. The bear accelerated, covering the ground between them in seconds and knocking Lucia to the ground with a powerful swipe of his foreleg. The impact drove the air from Lucia's lungs as she fell face down on the compacted soil pathway. Before she could recover, Tiberiu pinned her with his massive front paws, their considerable weight making it impossible for her to move. The bear's claws, even when not deliberately extended, easily penetrated her uniform and the skin beneath. Lucia's training had covered worst-case scenarios, and she instinctively curled into a protective position, covering her neck and head with her arms. This defensive posture likely saved her life as Tiberiu, apparently more curious than aggressive, began investigating her with his muzzle and paws. Nevertheless, his exploratory actions resulted in deep lacerations across her arms and torso as his claws tore through fabric and flesh. Lucia's screams alerted Alexandru Dragomir, a maintenance worker who was repairing a nearby water filtration system. Alexandru immediately contacted the emergency response team via radio while attempting to distract the bear by shouting and waving his arms from outside the enclosure. His actions momentarily diverted Tiberiu's attention, giving Lucia a brief opportunity to crawl several meters toward the still open access gate. The Wildlife Center's emergency protocol for animal escapes and attacks was activated within minutes. Veterinarian Mihai Antonescu arrived with a tranquilizer rifle, while security staff positioned themselves strategically around the enclosure perimeter. Mihai successfully darted Tiberiu from a safe distance, though the sedative would require several minutes to take full effect. During this critical interval, Tiberiu returned his attention to Lucia, who had managed to reach the gate, but lacked the strength to pull herself through due to her injuries. The bear approached her again, this time more agitated due to the tranquilizer dart. He swiped at her once more, catching her across the upper back and shoulders before the sedative began to slow his movements. As Tiberiu's coordination deteriorated under the influence of the tranquilizer, emergency responders were able to create a diversion that allowed 2 security staff members to enter the enclosure and drag Lucia to safety. By the time they extracted her, Tiberiu had collapsed into sedation near the center of the habitat. Lucia was immediately transported to a hospital 30 kilometers away where she underwent emergency surgery for multiple deep lacerations, tissue damage, and blood loss. Though no major organs had been damaged, The surgeons documented over 40 individual wounds requiring more than 200 stitches across her arms, torso, and back. Following the incident, the Carpathian Wildlife Center conducted a thorough investigation into the circumstances that had allowed the attack to occur. They identified the malfunctioning door mechanism and implemented a mandatory two-person verification system for all large predator enclosure entries. Additional emergency response training was provided to all staff, and security features for enclosures were upgraded throughout the facility. Tiberio remained at the Wildlife Center under modified management protocols. Behavioral specialists observed no unusual aggression following the incident, confirming that his actions had likely been driven by confusion and instinct, rather than malice. Lucia Ionescu spent 2 weeks in the hospital before beginning an extensive rehabilitation program. Despite the trauma of her experience, she expressed a desire to return to her conservation work once she had recovered. However, she acknowledged that she would likely never work directly with bears again. In subsequent interviews, she accepted responsibility for her procedural oversights, while emphasizing the importance of strict adherence to safety protocols when working with powerful wild animals. The incident served as a sobering reminder to wildlife professionals throughout Europe of the inherent risks in their field and the critical importance of redundant safety systems when managing potentially dangerous species. For visitors to the Carpathian Wildlife Center, Lucia's story became part of the educational narrative, illustrating both the majesty and the formidable nature of Romania's native brown bears.